In a world already torn between inflation, energy crises, and geopolitical rivalry, something massive just happened that few in Europe were truly prepared for. Africa and China, two regions often underestimated by Western powers, have just made a move so bold, so economically devastating, that it's sending tremors through Europe's financial core. A 200% trade tariff strike and the aftershocks are already being felt across factories, supply chains, and political offices in Brussels, Paris, and Berlin. For decades, Europe enjoyed its position as a global economic powerhouse, dictating terms, setting trade standards, and benefiting from cheap imports from developing nations. But times have changed. The balance of power has shifted east and south. China has risen to become the world's manufacturing titan, and Africa, once seen as dependent on European aid, is now flexing its industrial and resource-based strength. Together, these two forces just struck back hard. The new 200% tariffs imposed by African and Chinese trade alliances are not just numbers on paper. They represent a complete transformation in how the global economy operates. It's a message loud and clear that Europe no longer calls the shots. China, with its massive manufacturing base, and Africa, with its raw materials and emerging production networks, have formed a trade axis designed to protect their interests and punish exploitation. It started quietly, with trade negotiations behind closed doors. African nations, long frustrated with the way Europe extracted value from their resources while offering little in return, began coordinating through new economic blocs, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area. China saw the opportunity and stepped in as both a partner and investor, pouring billions into infrastructure, technology, and energy projects across Africa. Railways, ports, and digital networks all connected under one vision: independence from Western dependence. Then came the trigger. When European policymakers pushed for stricter environmental and import regulations targeting Chinese and African exports, calling them unfair and unsustainable, both regions saw it for what it was: economic control disguised as climate policy. In response, Beijing and African leaders announced synchronized tariff measures targeting European goods, luxury exports, and machinery. A staggering 200% increase in tariffs, effectively cutting off Europe's advantage overnight. The results? Immediate shockwaves. European automakers that relied on African minerals for battery production suddenly faced surging costs. Luxury goods from France and Italy, once easily exported to Chinese and African markets, became unaffordable. Even agricultural exports, once a steady business, hit a wall. In Germany, factories began to scale back production. Energy companies started warning of increased prices. Economists across the continent described it as the most serious trade retaliation Europe has faced in modern history. And yet, behind the panic, a deeper realization emerged: the old world order is fading fast. Africa is no longer the world's supplier of cheap labor and raw materials. It's becoming an equal player, setting its own prices, dictating its own rules, and defending its markets. With China's backing, it now holds leverage that Europe cannot easily counter. Europe depends on African cobalt, lithium, oil, and rare earth elements for its transition to green energy. And much of its consumer market depends on Chinese electronics, textiles, and manufacturing components. The 200% tariff strike directly hits these pressure points. The reaction from European leaders was swift but fragmented. Some called for emergency meetings with the World Trade Organization, accusing China and Africa of economic aggression. Others privately admitted that Europe's over-reliance on imported goods had finally caught up with them. The European Central Bank warned that inflation could spike again, just as the continent was beginning to recover from previous crises. Meanwhile, in Beijing and Addis Ababa, the tone was entirely different. The move was celebrated as a long-overdue correction, a rebalancing of global trade inequalities. African media framed it as a historic moment of unity and empowerment. China's foreign ministry described it as strategic protection of fair trade and mutual respect. For many in the global south, it was poetic justice. On social media, the story went viral. Hashtags like #TradeRevolution and #AfricaRising began trending. Analysts started calling it the economic earthquake of 2025. For decades, Europe had imposed tariffs, sanctions, and regulations that disadvantaged developing economies. Now, those same tools were being used against them. The long-term consequences could be monumental. European companies will be forced to relocate production closer to home or face extinction. Manufacturing costs will rise. Consumer prices will soar. And European political unity, already fragile, will be tested as nations argue over how to respond. At the same time, Africa's partnership with China is expected to deepen even further. New factories are opening in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa with Chinese technology and local labor. High-speed rail lines are connecting African cities, moving goods faster than ever before. And for the first time, Africa's exports are diversifying not just raw materials, but cars, electronics, and textiles designed for both domestic and international markets. For Europe, the nightmare is only beginning. As its trade deficits widen and inflation spikes, its influence over the developing world weakens. Countries that once depended on European investment are now turning to China and African-led consortiums. Even Latin American nations are watching closely, considering similar alliances to protect their interests. What makes this trade strike even more symbolic is its timing. As Europe tries to push for a green transition and a digital economy, it needs rare metals, energy sources, and manufacturing support, all of which flow through Africa and China. By imposing these tariffs, Beijing and African nations have essentially cornered Europe's supply chain. They've forced European leaders to realize that sustainability and independence can't exist without cooperation or at least mutual respect. This isn't just an economic battle, it's a philosophical one. Europe built its wealth on the assumption that others would always supply what it needed cheaply, reliably, and quietly. But now, the tables have turned. Africa and China are saying, no more. The age of dependency is ending, and a new era of balance or perhaps rivalry is beginning. Behind the scenes, quiet negotiations are already underway. European diplomats are scrambling to find compromises, offering to ease certain restrictions in exchange for tariff relief. But Africa and China seem in no hurry. For them, every day that Europe struggles to adjust is a reminder of how much the world has changed. And while European markets tremble, new trade routes are forming elsewhere. The Belt and Road Initiative, once criticized as an overreach, is proving to be a lifeline. Cargo ships, rail links, and digital corridors between Africa and Asia are now busier than ever, redirecting global trade flows away from Europe. For the first time in modern history, the West is not at the center of the world's economic conversation. This trade strike could very well be the tipping point, the moment historians look back on as the start of a new world order. A world where Africa and China stand shoulder to shoulder as global equals, setting prices, making rules, and deciding the future of commerce. And for Europe, the only path forward might be humility and adaptation. Because no matter how powerful an economy once was, the laws of global trade are unforgiving. Those who control resources and production control the future. And right now, that future belongs to those who dare to stand up and change the game. As factories slow, currencies fluctuate, and governments debate emergency measures, one truth remains. This isn't the end of globalization, it's its transformation. The rise of Africa and China as a united front marks the beginning of a multipolar world economy, one where no single region dominates, but all must compete on equal terms. Europe's economy is shaking today. But tomorrow, it will have to evolve or risk becoming a relic of its own past. As the dust settles, one thing is clear: this wasn't just about tariffs or trade, it was about power, respect, and the shifting gravity of the global economy. Africa and China have shown the world that alliances built on mutual benefit can shake even the strongest foundations. Europe, once the unquestioned leader of global commerce, now stands at a crossroads: adapt to a new order or fall behind it. The 200% trade strike wasn't the end of Europe's dominance, but it might be the beginning of a new balance. A balance where every nation, no matter how long it's been overlooked, finally has a voice. The world is changing faster than ever, and those who can't keep up will simply be left behind. Because in this new era of global trade, power isn't inherited, it's earned.